I first saw the house of Usher.
Wish.
Foolish and wicked.
Wish, damn you!
I wish my son alive again!
In his house relay, dead Cthulhu waits, dreaming.
Good evening. I am Dr. Graves. Welcome to
Mystery on the Air.
Good evening. I'm Dr. Graves, your host for this cavalcade of deliciously dark delights known as Mystery on the Air. A wise man once said, reality bites. Problem is, we don't know which reality he was speaking of. Was it this mundane world of cell phones and ramen noodles we know so well? Or was it some other reality, one just beyond our reach? Our good friend Howie Lovecraft knew all about other realities. He saw them in his nightmares and filled his stories with warnings of what would happen if the thin membrane between our reality and the next should somehow break. Tonight, on our program, we slit such a membrane with a tale of swamp-bound cults and doomed ships, dark rituals, and nightmares that bring death. It's a classic tale by H.P. Lovecraft. So, check that the door is locked and hold onto your pillow tight. It's time for The Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah?
Unskilled Fru Yed Besucher.
I speak some English.
Oh, thank God. I'm looking for Gustav Johansson. Is this his house?
You're not British.
No, American.
And in America, what does it mean when a woman wears black? And with tears?
It means she's in mourning?
So to Norse. Gustav is dead. Excuse me.
Wait, I'm sorry. He's dead? You say he's dead?
Yeah. You will excuse me.
How? What happened?
You are from the shipping company?
No.
Then it is no business of yours. I tell them the pension is not enough, but they refuse more. Again, excuse me.
Please, could I talk to you just a moment? Only a moment. We've come a very long way.
What is this about?
It's about your husband and his final voyage.
That was all settled by tribunal.
I know. I've just come from Sydney. I heard he made it home safely.
He did. Though he wasn't the same man.
What do you mean?
My Gustav. He was broken after the last trip. After the Emma. Never the same.
Forgive me. Was he ill? Is that why he died?
No. He was murdered, American.
I don't know what to say.
The police say no. The doctors say no. Heart attack, they say. My Gustav, his heart was strong. It was his spirit was broken.
How did it happen?
I don't wish to talk about these things. Leave me alone.
Was it on the street? Did sailors attend him? Find him there, I mean.
Who are you?
My great-uncle died the same way. Bumped in the street by a sailor, knocked down. He was old, but still strong, vibrant. The doctor said it was a heart attack, but in confidence, one of the interns told me they didn't know what had caused it. Heart attack was just what they put on the death certificate. I think we can help each other. My great-uncle and your husband were involved with something. They knew things, and there were people that want it covered up.
Then let them. It's no business of mine.
How did he die, your husband?
Please, leave me alone.
Please, just a moment of your time.
No, alone I wish to be. I'm sorry.
I can tell you why it happened.
What?
I can tell you why your husband died. I can explain everything. Everything except what happened to him on that final voyage. For that, I need to talk to you. In Sydney, they told me he kept a journal.
He did, but it's nonsense. Fairy stories.
But he did keep one.
He wrote it for the authorities. He never wanted to show it to me. He wrote in English, thinking I wouldn't understand. But I work for the English family up the street, a banker. My English is as good as his now. I read it all. It's nonsense.
What if it wasn't? What if I told you, proved to you it wasn't? Wouldn't that be worth a few minutes of your time?
Come in. I make tea. We talk. 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Sugar?
No, thank you.
So,
may I see the log of his final voyage?
no.
I just want to see it.
Later I show you. First you tell me what killed my Gustav. This you promise me, yes?
The story will not fit into 5 minutes.
Then you cannot see the book.
If you knew how important
You cannot see the book.
Very well. You have to understand, it's a very difficult story for me to tell.
My Gustav is difficult too. You must know this.
Yes. I know because something similar happened to me. My great-uncle and I were very close. I was the executor of his estate, and the one in charge of all his papers and effects when he died. He was a professor of Semitic languages at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, though he'd been retired several years when he first met the artist. There was a young man. Wilcox was his name. He came to my great-uncle one night demanding his help. He was ill, feverish. He would not be denied.
Yes? Can I help you?
You're Professor Engel?
Yes. Are you all right, young man?
I have...
Good heavens! Marie! Help! Help, quickly!
The artist hadn't slept in days and could barely stand. With the help of his housekeeper, my great-uncle got him into a chair and covered him up. He was ranting and raving about dreams he'd been having the previous nights. Dreams of a dead city that should not exist, buildings with angles that were all wrong, creatures lurking in catacombs beneath the streets. It sounded like nonsense to my great-uncle, but there was a reason the artist sought him out. One night he'd woken up from a particularly intense nightmare and leapt from his bed to record what he'd seen. He was studying to be a sculptor, and so he rendered the image in a simple clay relief only about 6 inches square. And along the edges were strange symbols, letters in a language the artist did not know. My great-uncle didn't know it either, much to the artist's disappointment, but his interest was piqued by that point. He asked the artist about his dreams, when they'd started, what he saw in them. The artist could only remember so much, but my great-uncle convinced him to keep a journal from henceforward. The artist was as good as his word.
I saw the city again. The terrible, cyclopean vista of dark and dripping stone.
My great-uncle realized it all began the night after we'd had a small earthquake. Small by most standards, but the most intense ever felt in New England.
I hear the subterranean voice of intelligence shouting monotonously, and enigmatical sense impacts, uninscribable, save as gibberish. These two sounds most frequently repeated were Cthulhu and relay.
It got to the point where the artist took ill. The doctor said his fever was not particularly high, but his condition appeared dire. Sweat poured from him and the dreams became more intense.
I saw it. Great, lumbering beast, miles high. Relay, Cthulhu Fathagan.
They feared for his life. Or his sanity.
Cthulhu Fathagan.
Until one night the fever broke, and he simply woke up. The artist had no memory of the dreams after that. He returned to his studies, apparently none the worse for wear, and the dreams just stopped. But for my great-uncle, it was just beginning. He felt like there was a connection between the artist's dreams and the earthquake, so he began to search newspapers, looking for other strange occurrences around the same time. What he found was astounding. A nocturnal suicide in London where a lone sleeper had leapt from a window after a shocking cry. A rambling letter to the editor in South America where a fanatic deduces a dire future from visions he has seen. A dispatch from California describes a theosophist colony as donning white robes en masse for some glorious fulfillment which never arrives. Voodoo orgies multiply in Haiti. And New York policemen are mobbed by hysterical Levantines on the very night the artist first came to my uncle's lodgings.
When was this exactly?
Late March and early April. What is it?
I remember. My sleep was troubled around that time. I do not recall any of the dreams, but I was sure I had some, you know? In that way, you awake and you know that you have dreamed.
I understand.
I thought it was because my Gustav was at sea. Sometimes my sleep is troubled when he is at sea.
Tell me, did you study art when you were young?
A little. Mostly I danced. There was a fine teacher in the neighborhood. Why?
In my great-uncle's notes, he posited a connection between the artistic mind and the dreams. Most of his friends at the university were unaffected as they were solid-state academics. It only seemed to be the artists and similarly sensitive individuals that were troubled.
This is a fine story, but you promised to explain what happened to my Gustav. The story you tell does not tell that.
It would be easier if I could know what was in that journal.
And so you shall, but only after I'm satisfied that you've kept your part of the bargain. What is it?
The next part is difficult. And not think I'd ever need to tell it to a lady.
Do not worry about that. I'm a widow. My sensitive days are behind me. I go to the hospital and they take me to the basement. Gustav is there on the table. They lift the sheet so I can see his face, so I can tell them, yes, this is my Gustav. Such a thing they do just to fill out their papers. Putting a woman through that.
I'm sorry.
I say it only so you know. Nothing will shock me now. When I was young, and Gustav and I were still courting, sometimes I would play at fainting behind a handkerchief so Gustav would hold me and pat my hand. He always looked so worried. Do you think that was a sin, to play with his feelings like that? Tell me, what's so terrible about your story?
The sailors.
The
sailors. The ones who knocked down my great-uncle, the ones who stood over your husband.
What about them?
Who were they? Where were they from? Where were they going? That's the thing about sailors, is they're never known by anyone, spare other sailors. They'd be the perfect people to commit murder.
That's not fair. My Gustav was a sailor.
And a good man, by all accounts. But what about these others? What about the ones who bumped into my great-uncle and the ones who leaned over your husband as he lay in the street? Could they have had a syringe with poison? Could they have had a charm, a spell?
What nonsense is this?
It's not nonsense when you take into account the people we are dealing with. And that's what I have to tell you about now. These people are monsters. There was a reason my great-uncle was intrigued by the young artist in his dreams. You remember that he first came with a bas-relief, a small sculpture.
I remember.
The figures represented in that small piece of clay were very similar to ones he'd seen years earlier. He wrote of it. It was at a gathering of archaeologists in St. Louis, one he attended every year.
Engel!
Webb, it's good to see you.
And you, sir. So good of you to join our dusty little bone diggers convention again this year.
Oh, there's more to my field than books, Webb. There's always a surprise or two in store at the little gathering.
You have no idea how right you are.
I'm sorry.
Come, the American Archaeological Society has a visitor, a policeman no less.
Really? Which one of you has committed a crime?
Just come, Engel. This is something quite remarkable.
One would think that we could get moving along.
Well, yes, and well, there are quite a few families in the swamps south of New Orleans. It appeared they would adapt to it.
But how? What is there to eat, even?
Oh, there's fish and some game. Of course, there's always lizards and even a gator.
Disgusting.
Oh, well, of course, I wouldn't recommend the gator. And tough hunting, that.
Inspector Legrasse, allow me to introduce Dr. Engel, Professor of Semitic Languages at Brown. Engel, this is Inspector Legrasse, all the way from New Orleans.
A pleasure, sir. Semitic languages. Now, what's that?
It refers to the study of languages from Arabia and the sub-Asian region. Arabic, Hebrew, and the like.
He likes to visit us diggers every year for a change of scenery.
Oh, and for your fine whiskey. For what do we owe the pleasure of your company, Inspector?
Well, I thought perhaps this fine organization could help me with a little puzzle of mine.
Yeah, show him Legrasse.
Show me what?
Well, a quite remarkable statue. Here it is.
Good. Go on.
His response is similar to mine.
It's nice to know we're not all mad.
What in heaven's name is it?
It was seized from a group of cultists that had taken up in the swamps south of New Orleans. I have absolutely no luck determining their intent beyond inflicting mayhem on good Christian people. But I am certain these were not the common practitioners of voodoo, which do in fact trouble us from time to time. No, these people were something else again. They worshipped this ugly little brute. So I have resolved that he, or it, is the key to understanding the situation.
It is quite remarkable. Bulbous head, tiny bat's wings, tentacles protruding from the mouth.
Do you know what sort of stone this is?
No, we were hoping to take a few flecks for analysis.
I've never seen anything like this.
I have.
Really?
In Greenland, some years ago, there was one tribe there that was feared by all the others. They worshipped a similar idol, though that one was carved from whalebone, of course.
Well, tell me, why was this tribe of yours so feared?
This god of theirs required blood sacrifice, which they accomplished by kidnapping women and children from neighboring tribes. They'd light great fires and dance around them in the dead of winter, chanting in a language no one else could understand.
Well, I must say that all sounds disturbingly familiar.
Inspector, if it's not too much trouble, perhaps we could hear the rest of your story. Maybe if we understood it, we could help.
Of course. Having come this far, it doesn't seem too much to go a little further. On November 1st, 1907, we received a frantic summons from the swamp and lagoon country to the south of the city. The squatters there, mostly primitive but good-natured descendants of Lafitte's men, were in the grip of stark terror from an unknown thing which had stolen upon them in the night. Some of the women and children had disappeared. Drums were heard far off within the black haunted woods where no dweller ventured. So, I took a company of 20 officers and set out in the late afternoon with a shivering squatter as our guide. At the end of the passable road, we alighted and for miles splashed on in silence through the terrible cypress woods. At length, the squatter settlement, a miserable huddle, hove into sight, and hysterical dwellers ran out to us to cluster around in stark fear. The muffled beat of tom-toms was now faintly audible far, far ahead, and a curdling shriek came at infrequent intervals where the wind shifted. Each one of the cowed squatters refused point blank to advance another inch toward the sound, so I and my company plunged on unguided into the black swamps. We searched by honing in on the sounds of the tom-toms and the screams. The sounds we were subjected to made the job, well, particularly difficult. There are vocal qualities peculiar to men and vocal qualities peculiar to beasts. And it is terrible to hear the one when the source should yield the other. Now and then the less organized shrieking would cease, and from what seemed a well-drilled chorus of hoarse voices would rise in sing-song chant that hideous phrase. Professor Angle.
Yes?
Do you recognize this tongue?
I confess I don't.
I'm not surprised. We reached a spot where the trees were thinner, and we came in sight of the spectacle itself. 4 of my men reeled, 1 fainted, and 2 were shaken into a frantic cry, which the mad cacophony of the origin before us fortunately deadened, so our presence was not detected. I revived the men and then turned my attention to the scene. In a natural glade of the swamp stood a grassy island of perhaps an acre's extent, clear of trees and tolerably dry. And on this now leaped and twisted a more indescribable horde of human abnormalities than was imaginable. Void of clothing, this hybrid spawn were braying, bellowing, and writhing about in a monstrous ring-shaped bonfire in the center of which stood a great granite monolith, 8 feet in height, on top of which, incongruous in its tiny size, rested this very statuette. All around it, in a wide circle, were scaffolds hung upon them, head downward, with the mutilated bodies of the helpless squatters who had disappeared. It is to my men's credit that they overcame their shock quickly and charged into the throng. Although there must have been nearly 100 mongrel celebrants, we were better armed and had the element of surprise. These people fought back fiercely with tooth and claw and whatever they had at hand. Shots were fired, escapes were made, but in the end we came back with 47 sullen prisoners and this ugly little statuette, which somehow seemed to be the cause of all the trouble.
You questioned them?
Of course, but we gained little information. There was an old mestizo named Castro who was the most help, a chatty fellow. According to him, they worshipped something called the Great Old Ones, who lived ages before there were any men, and who came to the young world out of the sky. These old ones were gone now, inside the earth and under the sea, he said. But their dead bodies had told their secrets in dreams to the first men, who formed a cult which had never died. According to this Castro, he said the cult had always existed and always would exist, hidden in distant wastes and dark places all over the world until the time when the great priest Cthulhu, from his dark house in the mighty city of Relay under the waters, would bring the earth again beneath his sway. Someday he would call when the stars were ready, and the secret cult would be waiting to liberate him. It's all nonsense to me, but Castro did manage to impart the meaning of their chanting. That Fagreguanus Cthulhu Raleigh Gagnelit Fathagen.
What does it mean?
It means in his house at Relay, dead Cthulhu waits, dreaming.
The dead dream?
I only relate the story from my great-uncle's notes.
It is very fanciful, this idea, and confusing.
From his notes, I can tell my great-uncle did not think Inspector Legras fanciful at all. He was a policeman trying to understand how 10 people died in his jurisdiction, nothing more.
I'm a simple widow. I want nothing to do with these things.
Then give me the log and be done with it.
No.
Why not?
Because you promised to help me understand why my Gustav died. You've done nothing of the kind, just told me fairy stories. The kind you tell children when you want them to stay in bed. You try to frighten me. You explain nothing.
Here.
What is this?
This is part of my great-uncle's notes. He drew it up.
A calendar?
Just 2 months. March and April of 1925. Here, in the red ink. These are the young artist's dreams. City of Raleigh, old ones, lumbering beasts. And here, below. Do you see these numbers?
Yeah.
They correspond to a newspaper clipping. A specific one in a collection of hundreds my great-uncle had. He must have engaged a clipping agency, for he had stories from all over the world. Suicides, murder, cult activity. Every night, 20 or 30 notations. And then, on the night the young artist's dreams stopped, so did the strange happenings. Don't you see, Mrs. Johansson? These old ones, the gods, the cultists in Louisiana worshipped, they communicated through dreams. For these few weeks in 1925, they were communicating. Broadcasting, I suppose you'd call it. And sensitive people all over the world felt it. And it drove some of them mad.
What has this to do with me?
Your husband's final voyage. The voyage of the Emma. It happened during the same time, did it not?
Yes.
But the Emma itself did not survive.
No. She sank. They had to board another vessel to survive.
The Alert.
I don't recall the ship's name.
Yes, you do. It's all right there in that journal. It's gotta be.
How do you know?
This. My great-uncle's notes include hundreds of newspaper clippings, but this one I found myself. It was blind luck, actually. I work at a museum in Boston and was unwrapping and cataloging a donation of artifacts from the South Pacific. The artifacts were wrapped in newspaper. By chance, I happened to glance at one and saw this. A simple article about the Alert coming into Sydney Harbor with only 2 men on board. Your husband and a man who had died during the voyage. When the article was published, there wasn't much known about the case, but the article did include a photograph of a strange object that was found on board. I've seen this object. It's in a museum in Sydney, hidden in their archive under lock and key. They only showed it to me out of professional courtesy. Look at the clipping, Mrs. Johansson. Now look at this.
You took a sketch?
This sketch isn't mine. It's a sketch my great-uncle made of the statue that Inspector Legrasse took from the swamp in 1907.
They are the same.
Precisely.
You think Legrasse's statue got on the ship?
No. I think there's more than one statue. I think there's dozens, maybe hundreds of cult groups all over the world worshipping these statues as a proxy for their god. Worshipping them by sacrificing innocent blood. But I can't know for sure until I read that journal. Thank you.
It stays in this house.
But if I could
It
take...
stays in this house.
Ship's log. Gustav Johansson, second mate of the Emma, a 2-masted schooner out of Auckland, now commanding the Alert, a yacht my crew commandeered at sea. This log will explain the events of March 1925 insofar as they can be explained. I make this log not of my own wish, but on the orders of the authorities in Sydney. If it were up to me, the things I have seen would never be spoken of, but it is not up to me. So, what I write here is on them. They wish to know the truth, they wish to know what happens, and so they shall. God have mercy on us all. February 20. The Emma departs Auckland in ballast, bound for Callao, Peru. Crew 11 men, Captain Collins in command. March 1st. Bad storm for several days, extremely high seas. Navigation difficult. When seas calm, we find our bearings and resume course for Callao, now several hundred miles off our original line. Crew is in good spirits. March 22nd. The trouble begins. At latitude 48 degrees, 51 minutes south, longitude 128 degrees, 34 minutes west, we encounter a ship. A yacht, which has been fitted with several guns. She is very well armed for a vessel her size. Too well armed. Without warning, the yacht fires on us. We are not equipped for battle, so we take heavy damage. The ship is sinking, so Captain Collins orders us to steam toward the other vessel and board her. As we approach, the crew of the other vessel crowd their rail and scream at us in many languages. They are dirty, violent, insane. They brandish clubs and threaten us. Some of them are stark naked, like savages in the jungle. As we approach, it becomes obvious they want us to turn back, but our damage from their own cannon has made this impossible. We board the ship, and the battle ensues. The crew of the yacht refused to surrender. They fought to their last man. They fought to their last drop of blood. They did not fight like men, but like animals. They all perish, and among our number, Captain Collins and First Mate Green are dead also, along with one other. We are now 8 men. With the captain and first mate gone, I am in command of this commandeered vessel, which I learn is called the Alert. I have heard of this ship. She was well known and well feared in these waters as a ship and crew that would trade in anything, including slaves. We search her stem to stern. She is ill-kept and filthy. Bones from raw meat, apparently the crew's only food, are everywhere. Some of the bones look human, possibly. And among the effects, we find a small statue kept in a wooden box made with skill and care. This statue, it is strange, like a little god with a head like an elephant and tentacles like an octopus on its mouth. It should be ridiculous, but something about the sight of it revolts me. I have never seen its like before, but it is still familiar somehow, like from a nightmare. It is as if a memory from a dream awakens in my own brain and says, "Stay away." We put the statue away out of sight, and that helps a little. Our ship is sunk. Our captain is dead. The log on the Alert's bridge indicates something located at latitude 47 degrees 9 minutes south, longitude 126 degrees 43 minutes west. The chart shows nothing there but open water, but the location was on the MS heading when the Alert and its beastly crew engaged us. They did not want us to go there and were willing to die to prevent it. So in honor of our fallen comrades, especially Captain Collins, we set a course and head straight to that spot. March 23rd. Heavy skies, seas rolling. At a little afternoon, the watch calls land ho, and we set eyes upon it for the first time. A towering stone pillar rising out of the sea. As we approach, we see smaller buildings and realize what we are viewing is a city covered in slime and mud from being submerged on the seafloor for a long time. Perhaps the recent earthquakes have thrust it up above the surface, I do not know. We move close enough, put in a small boat, and make land at approximately 2 p.m. I do not have words to describe this place. Anything below the sea for so long would be uninviting, but there is something more at work here. We found archways, buildings, a public square. All of them just looked wrong. Every angle was crooked, every building was repulsive to the eye somehow. And this was not the sea's doing. No erosion rendered this place such. It had been built that way. It had been built for beings other than man. The moment we set foot upon the island, each of us knew that we could not stay long. It is impossible to describe the place other than to describe the feelings the place inspired in us. It was a sensation of pain, nausea, discomfort in the very marrow of our bones. I have been at sea 20 years, and I have seen and felt some remarkable things, but I have never felt anything like this place. It was a city from the depths of the sea, but it was a city where we did not belong, and our very presence angered it. After a few minutes of searching, we concluded there was nothing here to explain why the crew of the Alert had accosted us, nor the condition of that crew.
It was suggested by some that the proximity to this place might have caused a kind of mass insanity, which led us all to worry that if we stayed here long, a similar fate would befall us. It was Rodriguez, the Portuguese, who made the fateful decision that we should take some souvenir from the place to prove where we had been. This was logical in my mind. I agreed at once. I agreed without thinking. And 6 men died because of my stupidity. We came to the center of this city of the dead and its tallest structure. It was a huge monolith, a pillar towering up into the sky. Obviously, this was the structure we first sighted at sea. At its base was an immense door like one would find on a warehouse or a barn. Like everything else in the city, it was made of stone and looked incapable of movement. There were carvings, gargoyles, all around the door. Rodriguez set his mind on removing one of these, a small figure which looked similar to the statue we'd found on board, as our souvenir. He grasped and struggled with it, the stone completely unyielding. During this, Rodriguez must have touched a button or a lever, because suddenly, the door in the front of the monolith began to slide up. As the doorway gaped, a tremendous rush of air forced its way out, and over us all. It was foul, putrid, the smell of death and decay itself, and so terrible was the force of the wind that Rodriguez was knocked from his feet and slid on the slime-covered stone through the door. He was the first man I lost under my first and last command. But his fall through the door into what I can only assume was a kind of pit did not appease whatever it was that we had awakened. If anything, it acted to sharpen the appetite of the thing that slowly emerged from the monolith and rose up before us. How do I describe what I saw? I cannot, other than to point to the statue we recovered as a lifeless imitation. The thing was a mountain. It was as big as the sky. It was nebulous, fluid, as if its flesh lacked substance yet still could exist in our air. It was a moving plague, a living, breathing holocaust, and it moved toward us like a hunter towards prey. We lost 2 more men immediately. They dropped on this spot from fear. Those of us that remained turned and fled. By the time we were in sight of the sea, there were only 4 of us left. By the time we reached the small boat, there were only 2, myself and Britton. We sat on the oars and rowed for our lives, not daring to look back. We made it back to the ship and took on full steam immediately, but the heavy, ill-maintained vessel was terrifyingly sluggish as Britton and I swung her around and made a course away from the cursed island. I got the course straight and almost dared to hope when...
There! God in heaven, there!
I looked back and saw it. The thing, the god, whatever it was, had reached the shore and was wading in toward us. And to my terrified eyes, I saw that it was making headway. It would overtake us if I did nothing. Britton went mad. His screams weren't human. It was as if the thing had him already, had his mind in a grip as sure and as deadly as if a predator had him by the throat. I looked back, the thing was gaining still. I could feel my mind beginning to slip, beginning to lose traction with the reality that I knew. And one part of that reality was the absolute certainty that if I remained on this course, I would not survive. Weighing my options, I could think of only one. Like Captain Collins had done before me, I decided to turn toward the danger. The yacht had a bowsprit some 10 foot long, like the horn of a narwhal, and I reasoned it would make a fairly decent lance. So I turned hard to starboard until I had come around 180 degrees, then pushed the engines back to full, and headed straight for the thing. I would ram it. Whatever it was, whatever it wanted, I would ram it. It gave me little chance for survival, but fleeing from it gave me none at all, so I steamed forward, straight into the monster. waited toward me still, showing no signs of understanding what I intended to do. My fingers dug into the wheel as I watched it grow larger in the bridge window. From big to huge to finally the point there was nothing but the monster. No sea, no island, just a massive bulk filling my vision. I fell back. I covered my eyes. I may have screamed, I do not know, but I looked at the last second and witnessed the bowsprit pierce the mammoth creature's flesh. The act of ramming the creature did not check the yacht's momentum at all. There was the slightest resistance against the bowsprit and the hull. It was as if we'd steamed through seaweed or slime. As I watched, the creature's flesh seemed to split and collapse. I could not believe my good fortune. I left the bridge and ran to the stern. Looking back, I saw what to my frayed and broken nerves was the most incredible sight yet. The monster, run straight through by the yacht, was reforming. The pieces of it finding each other like filings to a magnet, recombining, wounds healing before my eyes. For a moment, I thought that all was lost. For how can a ship with one man and a lunatic on board combat such a demon? But then I realized it pursued us not. It stood in the water, looking at me a moment. Then it turned and began lumbering back toward the island, with no more interest in us than a man might have for an insect that escaped the swatter by flying out a window. I sank to my knees and shook with relief. We were safe. We had lost our crew, our ship, and our sanity, but we had escaped with our lives. Then I staggered back to the bridge and came up short with what I saw. Bridden sat on the deck in one corner, dead. His hair had turned stark white, and 2 long streams of blood flowed from his empty eye sockets. The offending organs, his own eyes, were clutched in his cold, rigid hands.
It's unbelievable.
My Gustav, he does not lie. Maybe he's not right in the head at the end, but he does not lie.
They told me in Sydney they searched for the island at the coordinates that he said. They found nothing but open water. Of course, there had been another earthquake.
Earthquake?
The thing which frames this entire bizarre circumstance. There was an earthquake before it all began. The artist's dreams, the storm which blew your husband's ship off course, all the events in my great-uncle's newspaper clippings, all of it. Then a second earthquake and it all stops. The first earthquake thrust the city up above the sea, then the second submerged it again.
Then it could still be down there. This huge monster.
People have worshipped it for decades, centuries maybe. And if his account is to be believed, ramming it with a ship did not injure it at all. So yes, I would say it is most definitely still down there. Maybe the sea, the water inhibits it somehow. Maybe it stays below because it's just not its time.
And those that worship this thing, they killed my Gustav?
I think so, yes. And my great-uncle.
Why?
A kind of madness, perhaps. The blood is an offering to a distant, indifferent god. Maybe these old ones need to remain hidden, and these cultists are charged with keeping their secret. I don't know. I just don't know.
It does not matter now.
Why? What do you mean?
Because while you were reading, I heard the back door open very quietly. Then I hear a footstep in the kitchen. And now I hear someone breathing just through that doorway.
I don't know.
Don't. This is a mercy with what's coming to the world. This is a mercy. I'm coming, Gustav.
Cthulhu Fathagan!
Well, I hope Mrs. Johansson had enough tea and biscuits for their visitor. Don't worry, though. I'm sure he found something to eat. The Call of Cthulhu was based on the story by H.P. Lovecraft, audio adaptation by Jeffrey Adams. Our cast featured Justin Kapla as Howard, Ayla McIntosh as Inga, Douglas Screef as Professor Angle, Caleb Silvers as the young artist Wilcox, Jeffrey Adams played Webb and Gustav, and James Yount portrayed Inspector Legrasse. Other voices provided by the talented cast. Editing and post-production by Mr. Adams, with some sounds provided by the Free Sound Project at freesound.org. This program, copyright 2019 by the Icebox Radio Theater, which is solely responsible for its content. Learn more at iceboxradio.org. Now, this is Dr. Graves reminding you to always check under the bed and to be sure and join us next time for Mystery on the Air.
The music for this episode of Mystery on the Air was provided by the incomparable Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. The pieces used included the entire Shadowlands series, featuring Part 1, which is entitled Horizon, Part 2, called Bridge, Part 3, Machine, Part 4, Breath, Part 5, Antechamber, Part 6, The Pit, and Part 7, Codex. Also included from Kevin was the piece entitled Darkling. All these pieces licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. For more information and the licensed website for Kevin's work, visit the show notes of this episode.